Welcome back to Project Chana Power Hour. Each week we get together to learn and strengthen ourselves in our special mitzvahs of Kashrus, Shabbos, and Taras HaMishpacha, as well as other halachos that are pertinent to women. Our goal is to prepare ourselves and our homes to welcome Mashiach. Tonight's learning is dedicated Lizchus Rivka Bas Esther Eden. May she be benched with revealed brachas, begashmius, and baruchnius. If you would like to dedicate a class in honor or zechus of someone, please reach out via our email, projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. Please join us afterwards for tzedakah tehillim and a Mashiach thought. Okay, so let's get started. For our class on Hilchos Shabbos, we will be continuing the series on Shabbos Davening and exploring the meaning, halachos, and Minhagim behind it with Rabbi Braun. This is the second class in this series. Rabbi Braun is the Morozow Asra of Crown Heights. Thank you so much for making time to be on our program.
Okay, first of all, I also want to say that I got a lot of positive feedback from last week's shir. Originally, it was going to be just a one-off about the tefillos of Shabbos, but because of the positive feed, we're going to be continuing. So last week we spoke about Mincha on Friday, which is the preparation for Shabbos, and we're going to proceed tonight to talk about Kabbalah Shabbos, which is after Mincha on Friday. We went through last week Hoidu, Pasach Eliyah, Yidid Nefesh, etc., and some halachos associated with Mincha Friday for a woman that ben shlich, didn't have a chance to have Mincha. Listen to the recordings of last week, and for that matter, to all the recordings. We'll talk now about the Kabbalah Shabbos, which is an insert in our siddur between Mincha Friday and Ma'ariv Friday night. And that's this Kabbalah Shabbos is a really novel, new thing, and we'll talk about the history. But before we talk about that, the time of Kabbalah Shabbos, right before Kabbalah Shabbos, after Lichbenching, the Rabbeim have established that time for saying Chassidus. Sometimes it was said before Kabbalah Shabbos, and sometimes after Kabbalah Shabbos. We have primarily descriptions of the Rebbe Rashab in Lubavitch of his saying of Chassidus. He would say a maimer, he would regularly always say a maimer Friday night, often after Kabbalah Shabbos, before Kagavna, and it would be an hour and a half, 2 hour maimer. It would be a process. Afterwards, people would do Chazar, and the Balabatim would just go and daven, but the Bachar would do Chazar and only daven much later. Our Rebbe almost never said a maimer independent of a farbrengen. One unique thing that our Rebbe did different than the other Rebbeim, the other Rebbeim would often say ma'amarim at all different occasions. Our Rebbe would almost always say a maimer only in the context of a farbrengen. Some people look at that as a positive thing, some people look at it otherwise. The exceptions to the rule were Shavuos night. For many, many years, the Rebbe would come in the middle of the night on Shavuos and say a maimer. And on occasion on Friday night, sometimes Shabbos morning, really a couple of times, but Yud Shvat, if Yud Shvat wasn't Shabbos, before Shabbos or after Shabbos, then the Rebbe would say a maimer Friday night, a Yud Shvat Basi Legani maimer. That was the time which the Rebbeim have established for saying a maimer. So Lubavitch just would be done normally after Mizmor Shuli Yom HaShabbos, between Mizmor Shuli Yom HaShabbos and Kagavna. That's when they took a break and they would say the maimer. Now in Lubavitch, the custom is that we learn Chassidus. Generally, we always learn Chassidus, but particularly on Friday, as a preparation for Shabbos, we focus on our learning Chassidus to make sure we're properly prepared for Shabbos. And there were shuls that were considering the idea, why should we push off the Kabbalah Shabbos, Chunarana? That's about accepting Shabbos. Why don't we accept Shabbos first? And right before Kagavna, right before Baruch, then we'll sit down and learn Chassidus. And they wrote to the Rebbe about this, should we change the process? And the Rebbe writes in this letter, in the response, that as you yourself write in your letter, there's positive reasons to make a change and negative reasons to make a change. I don't know what the person wrote to the Rebbe, but he must have written reasons for, reason against. The Rebbe says one of the negative reasons that you didn't mention is we have a concept in the Chazal, Pnei Nechnasim. You do something, and if people come in the middle, they have no idea what happened before. People will walk into your shul, they see you learning, and then you stop learning, and you start saying Kagavna, and they don't realize there's a part before. So therefore, why don't you just follow what the majority crowd wants? And that was that. But the standard traditional Chabad custom, Chabad shuls, is that we have Shiur Chassidus, and we learn Chassidus Friday night before Kabbalah Shabbos. One of the reasons we have a break between Mincha, for those that have Mincha right before Shkia, and Kabbalah, the time for Kabbalah Shabbos. Besides, so we should be able to daven Ma'ariv Bismana at the right time, but also to be able to learn Chassidus. There was an occasion where the Rebbe said he started coming down early, and he said he noticed that people are sitting and talking instead of learning, so he doesn't want the shul to be full of Dvarim Etelim. He wants to come in early before the shul fills up with all the idle talk. Now, this is important. Just point that out about how precious that time is when Shabbos comes in. The Rebbe Rashab would actually accept Shabbos right after Lich benching. He would say for himself, it seems like he would do this himself. He would say all the Lechunanan and all of that. He would do the Kabbalah Shabbos, and he got till Mizmor Shili Shabbos, and only when the minyan started did he start saying from Mizmor Shili Shabbos. Although normally we do Kabbalah Shabbos with a minyan, although Kabbalah Shabbos is not actual davening, it's tefillos and Mizmorim to accept Shabbos. But the minhag is we try to do it with a minyan. One of the explanations is Shabbos is considered our mate. Which has said that Shabbos is a day on its own. Yidden are alone. Yidden are Am Levad Yishkan. They're an independent nation. Shabbos is a day alone. Sunday and Monday are set. Tuesday and Wednesday. Thursday, Friday. Shabbos stand alone. Shabbos are Yidden are Chas and Kala that meet up together. So when Shabbos comes in, it's like we're marrying our Kala. Now, Sheva Brachas are supposed to be said with 10 people. So it's an idea of doing Kabbalah Shabbos with a minyan. But that doesn't mean it has to be with a minyan. And already in those days, the Poskim wrote that people have a very hard time. The shul's adding all these tefillahs to bring a Shabbos. It's taking a long time, and he wants to do it by himself. Privately, there's room to do that. Many people come to shul. The Chazan puts on a talus for Kabbalah Shabbos, even if they don't normally wear a talus by night for Ma'ariv. The Chabad custom is specifically not to wear a talus at night at all, ever. The only exception to that rule is Yom Kippur, that we wear a talus throughout all 24 hours of Yom Kippur. There was a particular Babbat shul, there was an issue. Should we wear a talus Friday night? Should not wear a talus? Yes, no. The Rebbe said that the most important thing is that there shouldn't be any machlokes. And if we can arrange it, shouldn't be machlokes. Of course, we should act according to the minhag of Lubavitch, that we wear a talus only in the morning to Shachris and throughout the day, the entire, all 24 hours in Kippur. If there's machlokes, peace overrides everything. And for peace, you should give up. However, the Rebbe says an interesting thing. Give up Mincha Shabbos day, you won't wear a talus. Kabbalah Shabbos, no. That you shouldn't give up, because there are those opinions that say that wearing a talus during the time of Kabbalah Shabbos actually has a sakana. Kabbalistically speaking, there's a particular sakana of wearing at night a talus, and therefore you should not agree to the idea of wearing a talus at night. Interesting to see how significant this minhag is. We say the tefillos of Kabbalah Shabbos only on Shabbos. We don't say Kabbalah Yom Tov. There's no such thing. We say L'chuna Rana for Shabbos. We don't say special tefillos to accept Yom Tov. So we mentioned this. I believe we mentioned this last week. I was going over to get back into this. Shabbos is a day that comes on its own. Bezdin does not make Shabbos. It's a natural thing. Every week Shabbos comes. Yom Tov, we are the ones that make Yom Tov, because the Bezdin decided when the new month will be, and then Mekadesh the Chodesh, and that decides when Yom Tov is. So we are the ones that brought in the Yom Tov. Mekadesh Yisrael v'Azmanim. Yidden brought the Zmanim. Shabbos, we don't say Mekadesh Yisrael v'Shabbos. Yidden didn't make Shabbos. Hashem makes Shabbos. So since we didn't make the Shabbos, we want to go out to greet the Shabbos, and that's Kabbalah Shabbos. Now, for the history of Kabbalah Shabbos, in Chazal, we don't find any tefillah or piyut or capital tilm that they said when they received Shabbos. We do find they would say words when they accepted Shabbos. The Gemara says that Reb Chanina would put on nice garments. Friday towards evening, he would say, Boiv, and they'd say, let's go out, L'kras Shabbos, Tzmaka to Shabbos, the Queen. Rabbi Yana would put on a nice coat and say, Boi Chala. But other than that, we don't find anything else. Later, we do find a minhag developed to say the capital of Mizmor Shili Shabbos, Hashem Malach Geis Lavish. That's about it. And then it went straight to Baruch Hu. The process that we have, the whole Kabbalah Shabbos order, only started much, much later times from the Kabbalah of Tzfas, the Chachamim and the Kabbalists of Tzfas, in the time of the Ramak, Rameshu Carvadero, his brother Reb Shlomo Al-Kabitz, Arizal, students of Arizal, and started a whole process of going out to the field and saying a bunch of songs to honor Shabbos. It started with the Arizal, we know, went out to the field. He would say, Boiv and Eitzel L'kras Shabbos Malkasa, let's go out to greet Shabbos the Queen, L'chakal Patuch Kaddish, to the field of the orchard of holy apples. He said, Mizmel David Hovel Hashem B'nei Elim, that one capital Tilim, and Boi Chala. Later, they started developing even more, and then the song of L'chadoidi was introduced. We'll talk soon about that. 5 chapters until Mizmel David were introduced. It's not found in any of the Arizal manuscripts. We daven Chabad daven Nuschari, right? But this is not found in the Arizal's manuscripts. We find it by the students of the Ari. We find it by the students of Rameshu Carvadero, the Ramak, which is before the Ari. That he actually eulogized the Ramak. Some say it comes from the Ramak, But that was a much later introduction. So if somebody wants to be a purist and only do what it says in that Zibell, he'll miss out a lot of parts of his Kabbalah Shabbos davening. That everyone spoke about is that it's actually very interesting that Zibell knew about this behavior, and that Zibell did not introduce this behavior. He didn't include the whole Lechun, all those chapters of Tehillim. And despite all of that, the Alter Rebbe put into a siddur that tells you how special this is, even though it's not part of Zibell's ritual, it was put into the siddur. So this is a more recent development of Kabbalah Shabbos. There were times that there were the Parnasim, the Gaboyim, the people in charge of the shul would not allow people to go into the shul and say Kabbalah Shabbos. We're changing the minhag. There's no such thing as Kabbalah Shabbos. The minhag is Vidavar Ma'ariv, and that's about it. There was a special group called Chevre Mekabelei Shabbos, the Chevre, the Framakis, that they would say these Kapitl Chtilim al Chadoidi, and they were allowed to go in the hallway of the shul, and they would say Kabbalah Shabbos. But otherwise, no, they wouldn't let them do in the shul. As it is, the minhag of the Arizal and his students was to go out to the field, and there's all these stories that Arizal wanted to bring Mashiach when he went out to the field, and he told all the students they could go to Yerushalayim right away on Friday afternoon, but they wanted to come and check with their spouses, and it was too late. But the minhag was to go to the field. Nowadays, we all do it in the shul. We don't go to the field. I don't know why did the minhag develop that most communities do not go to the field, either because they were scared of goyim, and in places where there were a lot of goyim, so this wasn't practical to do all these street-wide events. People disturbed, there's passerbys, and that Zibell was in quiet fields where there was no people disturbing. Also, they want to have the opportunity of saying this special tefillah in the time that Zibell wasn't yet part of the ritual to say it as part of davening. Nowadays, that it's part of davening, we actually want to say it in the shul. We want to say it v'roivam in front of a large crowd, not having the unique, secluded, special group that says it out in the field. Especially we, let's say Kabbalah Shabbos when it's already night, so there's really not much point in saying in the field. In the field, you could see sunset. When we say it, you can't really see sunset. What we do have, the remnants of that minhag of going out to the field, that we turn around to the west side, to Ma'ariv, when we say B'ay Shalom. We stand when we Makabel Shabbos, and the reason we stand, because standing represents going outwards, like when you greet a Kashrus person, you stand up for him, you go out towards him, so we don't go out, we at least stand up. Some communities, they still have the minhag till today. You could check this out. There's communities that do this, that the chazan does not say it by the front of the shul, he says it by the bima. And in some places, he goes up to the bima only for the chadoidi. And the reason why this wasn't said by the stender with the chazan only davens in Ashkenaz shuls, first of all, because this was a late, more recent developed custom to say Kabbalah Shabbos, and they wanted to show that this is not part of Takanas Chazal, it's not part of the regular text of davening, it's a later custom, so it's not said from the regular place where the chazan davens, it was said by the bima, it was said somewhere else. And we have a similar concept in the Chabad minhag. The Friedrich Rebbe introduced it, we should say Tillim every single day after davening. And at the time, he said that the chazan should not be leading the Tillim from the stender, from the chazan's place after davening. He should move away from there. And the reason he should move away to show that Tillim is not part of davening. The Rebbe at one occasion said that nowadays it's no longer a concern. We finish off, we say Ach Tzadikim, we show that davening was over, then you could continue saying it by the bima. So there was such a thing with Kabbalah Shabbos that it wasn't said, from the stender. It wasn't said from the stender. But one of the reasons it's said by a bima, because the Arizal's idea was to say Kabbalah Shabbos on a mountain, so they say it by the bima, which is tall. Some people say, on the contrary, the reason it's said by the bima, just like it went out to the field, so the chazan goes out from his place to greet the Shabbos. What's this idea of the whole Kabbalah Shabbos? What's this all about? We greet the Shabbos. When we leave Shabbos, we greet it with songs. We accompany the Kala that leaves. When the Kala comes in, we accompany the Kala to the Chuppah with songs too. Now, since people are very busy, they're benching lift, they're preparing for Shabbos, so originally this didn't become an established custom that everybody has to do this to say all these kapitla. But eventually, over time, people introduced this idea. Yes, we want to be part of this minhag of accepting Shabbos with song, with piyutim. Shabbos is a form of Shechina. The Shechina dwells much more on Shabbos than during the week. The Shechina comes only with the Simcha, so the Kabbalah Shabbos is part of the Simcha. Shabbos and Yidden like a Chas and Kala. When we a Chas and Kala get married, we sing and dance. In fact, there used to be a minhag in certain communities that they used to have musical accompaniment to Kabbalah Shabbos. They would have harps, violins, whatever it was, and they would say Kabbalah Shabbos that way. However, when in those places where they had this minhag, they used to do Kabbalah Shabbos early, have a whole musical event, and then everybody would go home, the woman would bench licht, and the man would put on Shabbos clothing. It doesn't make much sense to do that when everybody's already in shul, and it seems like, 1 second, even if it's done before Shabbos comes in, but this is the acceptance of Shabbos, so it could be a bit awkward to do it with music. That's why the custom is not to do it with music. Our meaning, as mentioned earlier, is that we say Kabbalah Shabbos even later, even when it's nighttime. We actually daven late Friday night. As we said, we stopped for learning Chassidus. And we only start saying L'chun Arana when it's already night, and that's how they did in Lubavitch. We take a long break for saying Chassidus, and we only do Kabbalah Shabbos later. But it's considered the tefillah of accepting Shabbos. And that has halachic bearing. Then in some aspects, we treat the Kabbalah Shabbos as if we're still on Friday, although practically it's said on Shabbos. There are 6 chapters of Tehillim that are said before we sing the L'Chadoidi. The 6 chapters represent the 6 days of the week, and then we're going to go into Shabbos. And the reason for saying these chapters of Tehillim, when we greet a king, we talk first about the praise of the king. So now we're going to say these chapters of Tehillim praising Hashem. These chapters talking about accepting Hashem's kingdom. Hashem's kingdom is on Shabbos all over the world. And we talk about how everybody is nullified and awe and fear of Hashem. All the evil forces have fear for the Shekhinah. And when Shabbos is here, the Shekhinah is here fully. In fact, if you look at the Rosh Tevis, there's an interesting thing on these 6 chapters of Tehillim. L'chu Naranna, Shiru. Next chapter says Hashem Malach, Mizmar, Hashem Mizmar. The first letter of each one of them, Lamed, L'chu, Shiru, Shin. Hashem was with starts with a Yud, Yud Kevavke, Mizmar with a Mem, Hashem again with a Yud, Mizmar with a Mem, is the gematria of the word Nefesh. Work it out. Nefesh is 430, and then the gematria of the Rosh Tevis is 430, represents the extra nefesh that we get on Shabbos. And after these kapitel of Tehillim, the final kapitel is the kapitel of Mizmor LeDavid. Mizmor LeDavid, Havel Hashem and Elim. Some shuls have it, meaning they say it loud, pasuk by pasuk, chazan in the community, but that's the way the highlight of the Tehillim before L'Chadoidi. This kapitel is a kapitel all about Matan Torah, which is when the Torah was on Shabbos. It has 7 times the word koil. Koil Hashem Elomoim, Koil Hashem Makach. And the Gemara tells us that on Shabbos we daven 7 brachas corresponding to these 7 different koils. Some people actually say that we're saying this kapitel, so we should remember on Shabbos that we're davening 7 brachas. Don't by mistake daven your regular Shemoneh Esrei 18 brachas like you daven normally during the week. No, we're saying this Mizmor David will remind you that there's 7 brachas on Shabbos Shemoneh Esrei. Interestingly, there's actually 18 times Hashem's name in this chapter, and the Gemara tells us that's why we have 18 brachas and Shemoneh Esrei corresponding to the 18 during the week, to the 18 times Hashem's name in this chapter. The 18 brachas of Shemoneh Esrei correspond also to 18 times Hashem's name in Krishma, 18 sections in the spine, because all our bones have to be part of davening Hashem, 18 times that Avraham and Yitzchak mentioned together in the Torah, 18 times it says Kashrus Hashem Esmeisha, etc. But going back to the point that we're talking about right now, the 18 brachas of Shemoneh Esrei correspond to all those things and to the 18 times Hashem's name in this kapitel. The Rebbe said once, Basta Shaychis, why do we have 18 brachas of Shemoneh Esrei? Because there's 18 times Hashem's name in this chapter. So you picked a chapter that has 18 times Hashem's name, and then you said, oh, let's make 18 brachas. And the other chapters have less times Hashem's name. So the Rebbe explained that this chapter has to do with davening. What's this chapter all about? Preparing for Shabbos. That our entire avodah of the week gets elevated on Shabbos. What's tefillah? That everything that we do before that gets elevated during our tefillah. We take all the earthly matters. We're standing on a ladder during davening mutzav arza, a ladder on the ground, and we're elevating to Shamayim. In Chassidish language, we're going up from Biyah to Atzilus. To Atzilus. This is the chapter of going up to Shabbos, and tefillah is all about going up and elevating all our stuff. So this chapter has 18 times Hashem's name, corresponds to the 18 brachas. It says that in Svarim that we're supposed to stand when we do Kabbalah Shabbos like we're standing in front of the king. So the custom is that we stand at least from Mizmor David onwards. Some people start already standing from L'chun Ranana, but at least from Mizmor David, the custom is to stand till we finish Kabbalah Shabbos. And why this particular chapter standing is more relevant, because this chapter, we said that this chapter corresponds to the 7 times, the word koil corresponds to the 7 brachas of Shemoneh Esrei of Shabbos. The 18 times Hashem's name corresponds to the Shemoneh Esrei of the weekday, the Tefillah Samida of the weekday. So it's all about corresponding to Shemoneh Esrei when we're standing. It's the Tefillah that brings down, when we say this chapter of Tehillim, chapter 29, we'll bring down the level of Atzilus. And when we bring down the level of Atzilus, we're always supposed to be standing. So this is a chapter we stand, we represent the Shekhinah, which just like Kiddush Levana is supposed to be said standing because we're honoring the Shekhinah. When we're Mekabel Shabbos, we testify that Hashem created the world in 6 days. When we testify, we're supposed to be standing. So Kabbalah Shabbos is standing on this chapter. In some communities, they add a line before they start this chapter. And that line comes from the Arizal, who would announce, from the Gemara already, but the Arizal would do this when you go to the field, he would say, let's go out to greet Shabbos, and he would say this chapter. We don't say that in our minhag because we're not going out to the field, so we're not saying that anymore. So that's the point of this chapter. The Rebbe said in a Fabring, the Rebbe spoke about this chapter. He said, "Der mitzvah ben mekabel mebringt rein dem Shabbos." With this chapter, we're accepting and bringing Shabbos. And as we say right after this chapter, we say Pnei Shabbos Nekabel. We're going to go accept Shabbos. We're finishing our preparation for Shabbos on Friday, and with this chapter, we're going into Shabbos. And that partially explains the minhag that on Yom Tov, Chol Hamoed, or even Matzah Yom Tov, we don't say all the chapters before we start from Mizmor L'David. There's various different customs about this. Many customs when it comes to Yom Tov, Chol Hamoed, whatever it is, we cut down on our Kabbalah Shabbos, we do a shortened version. Our custom is, we do the full Chunaran, the full thing, but we start with, we do a full Chadaydi, but we skip the Chunaran, all those chapters, till Mizmor L'David. What's the reason of cutting down? So one of the reasons is that we cut down is because it's an embarrassment for Yom Tov. Well, you're saying Pnei Shabbos Nekabel, not saying Pnei Yom Tov Nekabel. Some people actually don't say the Chadaydi because it's Yom Tov. So it's embarrassing Yom Tov. We want to cut down on our prayers. Even if it's Matzah Yom Tov, we only say Kabbalah Shabbos when we had 6 days of the week. Now when we just had a Yom Tov. Because Kabbalah Shabbos is normally said before night. So hey, getting involved in reading the Shabbos, you're still in the middle of Yom Tov, it doesn't make sense. So not to embarrass the Yom Tov, we cut down. Or because of Simchas Yom Tov, we want to make our davening shorter. Alternatively, L'chun Haran is full of different expressions of Niranana, of Rina. Yom Tov is about Simcha, not about Rina. So we want to cut out on that. But the Rebbe explained, I'll finish with this, that the 6 chapters are 6 chapters of the days of the week. If it's Yom Tov and Chol Hamoed, we're not saying those 6 chapters, which are weekday chapters, don't mix Nishan on weekday when it's Yom Tov. The very last chapter was the last final Friday preparation for Shabbos, and it's the end of the preparations. Okay, that we got to say, because that's the preparation for Shabbos. But all the previous chapters we don't say. We'll stop right here. We'll continue next week all about Ana B'Chayach, how it's supposed to be said, quietly, the certain names of Hashem is supposed to have in mind. And we'll talk about L'Chadaydi. That's for next week in Hashem.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Braun. And for our next class, we are excited to continue with part 4 on our series on Tznius and boundaries in the workplace with Mrs. Sara Morozow. Remember, even if you're not in a situation where you're working with men, we believe this series will be interesting to you. We'll explore a sensitivity that we can all learn from to create and foster healthy and wholesome environments in the spaces around us. We are so grateful to have Mrs. Sara Morozow on our program again. Mrs. Morozow is a well-known Kala teacher and mashpia to many. Thank you so much for being on our program tonight.
Thank you very much. And now we're up to part 4 of Women in the Workplace. If in the previous 3 segments, we discussed the hashkafa and the proper mindset when we're faced with these halachos, and now we're ready to dive into the halachos themselves. So, first of all, I want to thank Rabbi Braun for reviewing these halachos and for Rabbi Rottenberg for answering all my questions down to the very last detail. I also want to thank Do'ehu, the organization that does give halachos for men and women in the workplace. Obviously, you will consult with your own mashpia and your own rav for your own personal situations and circumstances. If you have any question that you want us to address publicly, or if you have a nice anecdote or story, how you were able to maintain these boundaries, b'simcha, please email projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com, project Chana, CHANA, no H, CHANA, powerhour@gmail.com. And now let's begin. So before we get to the practical application of these halachos, we're begin with reviewing 3 mitzvahs, min haTorah, that govern male-female interactions. When we know the source, we know why we're more strict in certain situations than others. Here are the 3 isurim. Number 1 is in Parshas Achrei Mos. The pasuk says, "Loi sikrivu legales erva." Do not come close in ways that may lead to revealing nakedness. What does this mean? That closeness itself is asur, even if there's no marital act that actually happens. The closeness itself, the physical contact, is asur. It's not like muktzah, where the muktzah is d'Rabbanan, don't touch the pencil, so you won't come to the daraisa of actually writing on Shabbos. Here, the physical contact is a separate isur besides what may actually happen afterwards. So what is this halacha? An eshes ish, which means a married woman, and even an unmarried woman are forbidden from hugging, kissing, or engaging in any sensual skin contact with a man or a boy aged 9 or older, other than her father, grandfather, son, and grandson. Physical contact with one's brother is dependent on the situation and the type of touch and should be discussed with one's Rav. A married woman can engage in affection with her husband when she is in the state of tahara. Halachically, an unmarried woman is defined as any female starting from the age of 12, which is bas mitzvah, and onwards. In addition, these halachos will apply to a girl even under bas mitzvah if she has begun menstruating, through which she becomes nida. She enters the state of nida from the time that she begins to menstruate and remains so until she immerses in a mikvah kahalacha before her marriage. According to many poskim, this prohibition applies to even girls as young as the age of 3, so one should consult with a Rav on this matter. In nearly all the above instances, most poskim agree that this is a Isser Dairaisa, a biblical prohibition, and because of the gravity of this Isser, we are very careful to avoid any physical contact or touch at all. Now, physical contact or touch for medical reasons. Physicians, dentists, physical therapists, and other practitioners does not pose a halachic problem. For a male gym instructor or a male massage therapist, one must ask the personal shaila. Rabbinic opinions differ regarding the permissibility of a woman using the services of a male beautician, manicurist, hairstylist, and makeup artist. It is certainly something women aiming for an added measure of spiritual carefulness should avoid. In the case of the woman who does avail herself of such services, the beauty ones, extra attentiveness to the laws of yichud and tznius is warranted. So that's Isser number 1. Isser number 2, Lo sasuru acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem. Do not follow your hearts and eyes. This is an Isser that does not involve any physical contact. This is an Isser that will involve emotions, feelings, gazing, thoughts, etc. So what is this Isser? This is the prohibition against entertaining focused thoughts of or intentional romantic feelings towards a member of the opposite gender who is not your spouse. The consensus of the poskim is that this prohibition, known as hirhur, applies to men in a more stringent way, that even thinking about women is already asur. Hirhur is prohibited for men whether or not this leads to hitzas zera levatala. Now, although technically the Isser does not apply in the same way to women, meaning for women, short-lived thoughts would be fine versus intentional gazing for pleasurable purposes or engaging in fantasy, that would be forbidden for women as well. The Mittelgaber writes in Pakech Irim that women should not make light of this concept, as engaging in these types of thoughts can be harmful to their future children. For this reason and others, Hasidim and other groups have always been careful to avoid relationships, even platonic ones, like just friends with the opposite gender. Now, although to some, such practices may come across as foreign or even extreme, if one is honest about the halachic challenges inherent in intergender relationships, such precautions may appear less excessive. Every person knows that if you want to eat a more healthy diet, one of the first steps is to remove unhealthy choices from your pantry and shelf. Why tempt yourself? Most of us will most certainly reach for a poor choice in food when we are tired, depleted, or upset. It's the same principle here, except the stakes are much higher, since emotional entanglement can easily lead to touch, which is actually prohibited by halacha. Please note that a woman may look at a tzaddik or erlich yid, even if she derives pleasure from gazing at his countenance, as this pleasure is not a result of looking at the man, but rather at the holiness that cloaks him and her desire to learn from his pious ways. This is therefore permitted. The third Isser is lifnei iver lo sitei michshel. Do not place a stumbling block before the blind. The Torah makes each Jew responsible for the welfare, both physical and spiritual, of his or her fellow Yid. The Torah entrusts adult men with an obligation of Kedushas Habris. As women, if we engage in behaviors that cause a man to transgress this prohibition, as well as the Isser of Lo Sasuru, it becomes our Avera as well. Given these three Isurim Dairaisa, which means it's biblical prohibitions, it is no surprise that the Shulchan Aruch discusses the laws of intergender behaviors at great length. Now, we mentioned this earlier, but it's worth mentioning again. Ever attentive to the pragmatics of modern day life, in this case, the multifaceted lives of women outside of their home, the Rebbe urged women to conscientiously observe the laws of Yichud as they impact the home, the workplace, and travel arrangements. The Rebbe recommended, in fact, that women make use of few male drivers when there may be a concern with the Hilchos Yichud. It's important to be knowledgeable and aware, as problematic scenarios that need to be negotiated can arise without advance warnings. Now we're going to move on to the way the Shulchan Aruch explains or elaborates on these mitzvahs. And this is, you'll find the reading in Even HaEzer Siman Chaf Aleph Seif Aleph, and it's titled Lisrachik, to distance oneself, Min ha'arayos, which are people we're forbidden to have a marriage relationship with. I will read in the Shulchan Aruch, and then I will translate it in English. Sarich Adam Lisrachik Mihanoshim Ma'id Ma'id, Va'asar Likretz B'yadav, Iberaglav, V'lirmaz Be'enov, La'echad Meha'arayos, Va'asar Lischak Ima, Lahakil Reishay Kenegda, Oy Lahabit B'yofya, Va'filu Lahariach B'bsamim Sha'aleha Asar, Va'asar Listaka B'noshim, Ha'emdes Al HaKvisa, etc. A person must stay very far from women. He is forbidden to signal with his hands or his feet, or hint with his eyes to one of the arayos. He is forbidden to be playful with her, to be frivolous in front of her, or to look upon her beauty. Even to smell the perfume upon her is forbidden. He is forbidden to gaze at women doing laundry, because in those days they would do laundry at the river and they would have to lift their skirts and their legs would be exposed. And because that would necessarily happen, men cannot gaze at women doing the laundry. Another halacha that we're going to discuss is Asur liyishtamish be'isha klal bein gedolim bein ketana bein shivcha bein mishuchreres shema yovei lidei hirher avera be'ezeh shimush amru v'chitzas panov yodav v'raglav afilu ritzek loy mayim v'chitz panov yodav v'raglav afilu eina negas bai v'hatzas hamita b'fanav u'mezigas hakos. It is forbidden to be served by a woman at all, whether she is an adult or a minor, whether she is a slave or free, lest he come to have forbidden thoughts. What service were they speaking of? There's three. Number one, washing his hands, face, and feet, even to pour water so he can wash his face, hands, and feet, even if she does not touch him. Number two, making his bed in front of him. Number three, pouring a drink. So to summarize, before we get into the practical details, to summarize, a woman in the presence of men must be careful to be dressed fully Tznius, not sing, and be cautious that he does not smell the perfume on her body. In addition, her interactions with him should not cause closeness. This is in addition to laws of Yichud and forbidden touch. Now, I just want to interject here that we know that the Rebbe was very careful with halachos, even for children under bar and bas mitzvah. I'll give you one example. By children's rallies, you could hear it was announced when it came time to sing that the boys will sing and the girls will clap along. And when the Rebbe discussed Avos Yisrael or Shalach Manas or doing Mitzayim, the Rebbe always said, Yingalach mid Yingalach, the boys should influence and be, Avos Yisrael Shalach Manas to the boys and the girls with the girls. And there's much more we can elaborate about the Rebbe's Sicha and how the Rebbe, another example is when the Rebbe edited the covers of the Mashiach Times and the newsletters, the Rebbe wanted that every picture should have at least a boy and a girl, because Yiddishkeit is equal, male and female, but they should not be pictured in an interactive activity. The boys should be doing one thing and the girls should be doing something else. So I just wanted to say that the Rebbe was, the Rebbe's shita is to be careful in these halachos. And now we're going to get to the practical situations. Boundaries in practical situations. We will list situations that lend themselves to closeness and friendly relationships between people. As mentioned earlier, some of the situations are actually forbidden, like touch or yichud, and other interactions are poskim say to avoid because they will very likely lead to an actual isser. If you are the boss or the owner, you owe it to Hashem to set up the working environment in a manner that halacha is kept in the most ideal way. If you are the worker or the client, you can ask questions at your interview or find out information in advance from other people who work in that place. You can then be in touch with your mashpia and rav for guidance. So the first thing we're going to elaborate on is physical touch. As mentioned earlier, it is prohibited for a man and a woman to make physical contact with each other, even if there's a garment like clothes or gloves between them. If physical contact is necessary for health reasons or to save one from danger, it is permitted. Handshakes. It is prohibited for an unrelated man and woman to shake each other's hand, even if the intent is for business and not for personal nature. Hence, if a frum person comes across someone secular, non-Jewish, who extends their hand, the frum person may not shake it. This is how we paskin. Here are some suggestions. When doing business with a member of the opposite gender who is not familiar with these halachos, it is advisable to notify them in advance about the guidelines regarding physical contact. That it is religious protocol applicable to both men and women and not to be perceived as a personal affront. Typically, when this is explained nicely in advance, it is understood and respected. Some people choose to explain to members of the opposite gender. In our religion, it is customary to only shake hands with members of the opposite gender within the immediate family. Others, while attending a business show or expo, make sure to hold a coffee, a laptop, papers, etc., so that a handshake is impractical. Some people arrange to have their spouse present with them when meeting a member of the opposite gender. This way, the husband can tell the female business associate, "My wife is here to shake your hand twice, once for herself and once on my behalf." And the same can be done when the genders are reversed. Looking at a computer together. When an unrelated man and woman need to view something together, they should maintain adequate distance between them. They should certainly not lean over one another to avoid the possibility of inadvertent contact. When an unrelated man and woman must review something together on a computer, it is preferable that the document or information be printed out first. This makes it easier to maintain a proper distance. In addition, it prevents familiarity during the review. I just don't know how to say that word. Familiarity, whatever that means, however we say it. Okay. Handing over an object. We paskin that it is halachically permitted for an unrelated man and woman to hand an object one to another when necessary. One should take special care to avoid physical contact, especially when the object is small. Now, some Hasidim paskin differently, and they do not hand an object between men and women. So we should honor that if we work with that demographic. Special needs. It is important to note that in most cases, the halachos of physical contact do not change even if the person receiving care has special needs, such as physical or mental limitations. Therefore, a woman is looking to go into or is already employed in the special needs field as a teacher, an assistant, a shadow, a babysitter, friendship circle. With older children or adults, she must consult a rav as to whether and how this work is permitted, since in most cases, physical contact is inevitable during the course of such work, and you ask your own personal shaila. About traveling together regularly, that means, let's say you could get a ride with your boss or the coworker who's a man. Even if technically there's no shaila of yichud, it should not be done on a regular basis because it leads to closeness, which is forbidden. If there's a real need, on occasion, if that can happen, it's an emergency, a special situation, she should sit in the back seat and be cautious that there's no conversation between the two of you. Now we're going to discuss serving one another. It is forbidden for a man to be served by an unrelated woman or girl. It is also forbidden for a woman to be served by an unrelated man. This prohibition applies when A, the serving takes place in the other one's presence, and B, only if it is directly in front of the other. Those two conditions, in the other one's presence and directly in front of the other. The reasons for this prohibition is because the Rishonim explain two things. One, the woman shouldn't become accustomed to spending time around men. And two, that the man doesn't come to have inappropriate thoughts. So this prohibition includes any service a woman would do for her husband as a display of closeness. For example, pouring a drink of some value, such as wine or coffee, into the man's cup in his presence. Two, preparing a plate of food for a man. For example, taking food from the serving plate in the middle of the table and setting it down on the man's plate in his presence. In a situation where the man has difficulty getting the food for himself, then the woman can serve him if she does so without any special attention, in a matter-of-fact way, such as putting the plate down without saying anything, and preferably she should do it with a shinoi. Making coffee for one's boss. If a secretary has to prepare a cup of coffee for her boss or manager, she should do as follows. She should not put the coffee down right in front of him. Rather, she should put it down a short distance away from him. If the boss asks for milk or sugar, she may bring to him the milk or sugar, put it down next to the coffee. The boss should put the milk or sugar into the coffee himself. She is allowed to order takeout food for him and place the closed bag of lunch or the closed lunch order directly in front of him. Alcohol. In general, men and women may not drink alcohol or mixed beverages in a mixed setting. If it is a formal mixed setting, such as a Shabbos meal, and she tastes or has some wine as part of a Seudah, it is okay. However, it is always forbidden, whether at a Shabbos Seudah, whether at a wedding, whether at any other mixed situation, it is always forbidden for a female to drink alcohol in the presence of men in the amount that would affect her sense of judgment or affect her manner of self-comportment in speech or behavior. And most certainly it's also if this leads to immodest behavior. Men are also forbidden to engage in drinking to the extent that it causes immodest behavior. This halacha is even more strict with non-Jews because of stam yenam. You have to know where the wine or the alcohol comes from, and it's forbidden to drink wine with the non-Jew. Also, eating and drinking without alcohol poses a shaila with non-Jews, and therefore a shaila must be asked. I do want to interject here how the Rebbe was very careful with this halacha about alcohol, even for under bar and bas mitzvah. So in Likutei Sichos, Chelek Chavches, page 239, and this is from Shabbos Parshas Bamidbar Tashim Mem Vav, the Rebbe was talking about that as a hachana for Matan Torah, people should engage even in acts of tzedakah as a hachana, as a preparation, but because we cannot actually give tzedakah, so we should do some action that shows Avos Yisrael, that we're sharing one with another. So the Rebbe says, and I quote, this is an edited sicha, Ro'oi v'nachin, it's proper, asher hayogadim hanimtzaim kan, the children that are found here, v'chein hayogadim hanimtzais be'ezras nashim, and so too the children that are found in the ladies section of the shul upstairs in 770, yaschiru b'maisu u'pa'ula shel tzedakah u'gemach ha'mutar ba'ifin ha'mutar b'yom ha'shabbos. They should begin with an action that shows tzedakah or gimel chasadim in a way that is permitted on Shabbos. Every male, every boy should exchange with his friend, the other boy, a little cup to say l'chaim. V'chol yalda, and every girl, titen l'chaverta mini mezaynis shalad. They should exchange their mezaynis. And by exchanging the boys, the l'chaim, and the girls, the mezaynis, this will be an act of tzedakah and gimas chasadim, and that is, again, actual action of Avos Yisrael, and then the adults should follow what they do. I just wanted to point out that this halacha, how careful the Rebbe was. If you have an anecdote that you want to share, or you have a question that you want to ask on the above mentioned information, or something else you want to discuss, please email projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com, projectchana, Chana without the H, powerhour@gmail.com. gmail.com. I also want to make mention that there's a sefer called Shlichus Kehochasa, and there they are the hayrosh that the Rebbe gave for shluchim, and somebody who's going on shlichus should avail themselves and study the sefer and ask the appropriate shaylos, so that even in a place of shlichus where they have to have more exchanges with people of the opposite gender in order to be makar people to Yiddishkeit, that it's done exactly how the Rebbe wishes it to happen, and of course to ask shaylos accordingly. Thank you very much, and the halachos will be continued in Mirz Hashem in the next segment.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Morozow. And our next class for Kashrus, tonight we will be covering a new topic in our series of harmful foods. Is there such a thing as contaminated food? We'll find out more with Rabbi Nissan Zibell. Rabbi Zibell is the Kashrus administrator at the RCF, the Rabbinate of Central Florida, and delivers classes to the general public on various Kashrus topics. He is also highly active in answering consumers' Kashrus questions on a daily basis. Thank you very much for being part of our program tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, and good evening. As mentioned, we are in Harmful Foods Part 10, which we're going to be discussing this week, the topic of contaminated foods. Last week, we ended the topic of discussing specifically dangerous drinks, things that apply specifically to drinks that could be harmful. This week, we are going to start discussing foods, drinks, and regular foods as well, which are included in this, with possible contamination of ruach ra, a spiritual, impure spirit, or that can contaminate the food, and we'll go right into it. We'll begin with food that was touched by somebody that did not wash negvasser. As we all know, in the morning, when someone wakes up, they have tumah that remains on their fingertips, their hands, and that tumah is a very harsh tumah, and one needs to wash negvasser. If someone, for whatever reason, did not wash negvasser, and they touch food, what is the status of that food? So we'll begin first with what we know. We're told, it's brought down in halacha, that we're not supposed to touch food. Someone who did not wash negvasser yet is not supposed to touch food. And this applies even if the food is 100% dry, and the person's hand is dry, and someone picks up an apple. That tumah goes from the hand into the food, and it doesn't just go on the peel. Technically, that whole entire apple now has tumah, and it wouldn't even help technically to peel that apple. And even though there was no wetness, just a dry contact directly with the food will transfer a tumah to the food. And therefore, one is not supposed to touch food in such a situation when they did not wash negvasser yet. Obviously, when it comes to adults, usually we be more on top of it, but this applies as well to children. In halacha, it mentions that already children from the age of chinuch, we're supposed to avoid having them touch food. When it comes to a child under the age of chinuch, the Alter Rebbe brings that someone who's careful from having even a baby after the bris touch food before washing negvasser, then kadosh ya'amar, it's holy should be said about such a person, that they're taking on such a holy standard. Obviously, it's not required, but it's if someone wants to be living a life of kedusha, of utmost holiness, then that's something to be careful with. However, if we look at the wording of all these halachos, all the halacha discusses is that one should not touch the food. But it's not clearly discussed what happens if the food was touched b'di eved. What would be the halacha? Before we touch on that, we just clarify that this whole topic does not apply to goyim, to non-Jews. That's because the tumah is only attracted to come when there's a body that has kedusha, that has holiness. However, a non-Jew does not have that kedusha which attracts the tumah, and therefore they do not have any tumah, that specific tumah that we have when on our hands. So a non-Jew, a guy that touches food, would not be an issue, and does not, all this does not apply to it. So whatever we're speaking about today is specifically referring to Yidden. In addition, it does not apply to foods that are in a container. So if there was a bottle with whatever, anything in it, and someone took the bottle and passed it to someone else, that would not transfer the tumah, because it's only when there's a direct contact with the food and the hand. Or if someone was wearing a glove, also it would not pass the tumah. But again, in the clear halacha, what the Alter Rebbe mentions, it seems Alter Rebbe just says we should be careful not to touch food. But he doesn't address what if the food was actually touched? What would be the halacha in such a case? B'di'avad, after the fact, how do we approach this food? There are some authorities that say that the food becomes absolutely forbidden and needs to be discarded in an area where no one will ever come in contact with it because of how severe the tumah is. However, many authorities, or most authorities, hold that b'di'avad, after the fact, there is no issue with the food, and the food could be consumed. It's just l'chatchila, from the preferably one is supposed to avoid such contact. However, if it happened, the food is still considered okay to eat. Practically speaking, what should Chabad Hasidim be following? So we have Avram Chaim Noah, which was a Chabad Pesach, and his Sefer HaShulchan discusses this. And he writes that although the food b'di'evet is okay, it's better still to avoid eating it because of this tumah that it contains. But he brings that if one can wash negavaser on the food, that means wash the food 3 times with like a kvart, as if they were washing negavaser, but they wash the food, then the food could be eaten. Obviously, this would only apply to food that can be washed without absorbing water, because the moment you would absorb the water, instead of coming off the food and cleaning the food, would be absorbed in the food. So such a thing of washing wouldn't work on a piece of bread, but it would work, let's say, on an apple, on a vegetable that you can wash. So he suggests that foods that can be washed, wash negavaser on the food, and it's totally fine. Food that cannot be washed, although halachically is fine, it should be avoided. And the poskim actually bring that such food, although technically is halachically fine, it still will have some spiritual side effects and damage on the person. It can cause timtum halev. It can cause dulling or numbing of one's spiritual sensitivity. So therefore, one who wants to be extra careful with their spiritual sensitivity and their timtum halev should avoid such foods, although halachically it is permissible. There is an interesting note from the Rebbe, and we'll share the screen so everyone can see this. So there was an article that was written in the Yiddish Haim, which is going to be a guide to give parents some guidance in bringing up children and various other things. And in there, they had written about food touched by someone who didn't wash negavaser, and they had given it to the Rebbe for editing, and the Rebbe edited the following. First, we'll read what they had written, which originally was written: food which is touched by any Jew who did not wash negavaser should not be eaten. It has absorbed the tumah from the fingers. And the Rebbe circled where it says should not be eaten. On the side, he wrote, Kama b'nei Yisrael noyagen king, question mark. How many of the among the Jewish people actually follow this or have this custom? So meaning to say that although it may be a commendable thing to do to avoid such food, but to make this as a standard that the food should not be eaten, and like across the board, The Rebbe is pointing out how many among the Jewish people actually follow this, because majority of opinions actually hold that this would be fine. So to make this as an official standard and a guide may not be appropriate, but nevertheless, this does not mean that the Rebbe was saying that it's suggested if someone wants to keep a higher level of kedusha, they should be avoiding such food. Now, there is some practical applications. First of all, most hashgachas, or almost all hashgachas, are not careful with the workers coming in and washing their hands. Obviously, non-Jewish workers, we said, doesn't apply. So this would be Jewish workers that are that are not from, and they're not washing like Ravasar at home. It's very rare. Maybe in Eretz Yisrael, one hashgacha, maybe Rabbi Landau officially has that standard, but almost all of the hashgachas that exist don't have that enforcement. Does that mean that one needs to start being careful to only eat from a kitchen that only had frum workers, or that they made sure that the workers wash negavasser? How about going to a fruits and vegetable store and some other people touch the fruits and vegetables and maybe they didn't wash negavasser? To what extent does one need to be careful? So Rabbi Chaim Noah, in his work called Ha'aras L'Maisa, which was a collection of articles that he wrote, practical halachos, throughout the years, he addresses this, and he writes that it brings that there's various approaches. If one could safely assume that these people wash their hands, not a halachic washing with a cup, with the kvart and all that, but even just a basic washing, as today we can assume that most people, by the time they get to work, if they're working in a kitchen or in catering or a restaurant, they wash their hands at least once for hygienic purposes. It usually could be almost 100% of the case. Then in such a case, you have a lot more room to be lenient, because there are various opinions that hold that even washing once removes the significant amount of tumah. And we see this as well in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, in Madura Kama of Orach Chaim, in Siman Daled Sif Yud Ches. The Alter Rebbe actually writes that, technically speaking, one who gets up from his bed, that when there's a requirement to wash negavasser, could technically wash without doing the whole 3 times, just by washing their hands, and that would be enough. Although practically speaking, that's not how we do it. But since there is such an approach in halacha that the tumah could be removed by a basic washing without needing a cup specifically, and 3 times alternative that alternate, then we could say that the main tumah has been removed, if we could safely assume that these people wash their hands already before going to work, and that would take care of the big amount of tumah. Although there may be a little bit tumah left, it's not enough to be concerned with. Obviously, one should speak to the Rav what approach it should be taking. If somebody bought fruits and vegetables from a store where there's a real concern that maybe somebody went and touched them and didn't wash their hands, and there are fruits and vegetables that could be washed, you might as well wash it to be extra careful. But again, one should speak to the Rav for guidance exactly how to go about in such scenarios. There is a interesting story. There are some opinions out there, actually not Chabad, that say that if one knows of a certain bakery that is owned by non-frum Yidden, and they make bread there, and then there's also a kosher option to buy bread that's not pas Yisrael, not baked by Jews, but rather pas palter, non-Jewish bread baked by a non-Jewish baker. Some opinions are not Chabad say it's better to buy the non-Jewish bread, because over there non-Jews don't have this issue of tumah, of negavasser and tumah, and therefore it's better to buy bread in such a store. However, we have an interesting story. This story was told to me by Rabbi Yitzchak Hanoka from the OK, which he heard it directly from Rabbi Shvei Alav Shalom, which heard this directly from Chassidim. That in the times of the Frierdiker Rebbe, they had to ask the Frierdiker Rebbe this question: if there's a bakery that's owned by non-frum Yidden, but at least we know it's pas Yisrael, it's baked by Jews, just that they're maybe not washing their hands for negavasser. And then there's a Geisha bakery, which is also obviously selling kosher bread, but just not pas Yisrael, it's pas palter. Which one is better to consume? And the Frierdiker Rebbe had replied that when it comes to the Jewish bakery, we're dealing with a Ruach HaTumah, which is a spirit of impurity. But when it comes to a non-Jewish bakery, you're dealing with Tumah Mamish, pure, actual impurity. Which there's many ways to understand it, but one way to understand it is that when it comes to the non-Jewish bakery, you're dealing with one aspect of impurity, the Ruach HaTumah, certain aspect of Ruach HaTumah. When it comes to non-Jewish bakery, that Chachamim forbid us from eating non-Jewish bread, although there's exemptions in circumstances where halacha may allow it. This is dealing with Tumah Mamish, something a much more severe degree of Tumah, and therefore, in such a case, the Frierdiker Rebbe gave directives to eat specifically from the Jewish bakery and not to eat from the non-Jewish bakery. But what we see from this as well is that it seems like b'di'evad, it was fine to consume this bread, although they may have been not from Jews and not washing Nagvasser, probably with the assumption as well that, again, that they're probably doing a basic hand wash some point in the morning or the day before they start working and dealing with food, and that may be enough ready to consume the food and not be concerned with the Ruach HaTumah. In addition, another, I'm not sure how much time we have because I know we started a few minutes late, so maybe somebody who's one of the admins could tell me how much longer we have. We started about 5 minutes late. If we can go 5 more minutes, if not.
So you can have 2-3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. So there's another food which can get some sort of spiritual contamination is food that was placed under a bed, and it's a discussion. First of all, if this applies only if the person's sleeping under the bed, or if it's even when the person's not sleeping under the bed. From the Alter Rebbe, it seems that it's an issue at all times. He doesn't specify specifically when someone's sleeping, but it says that such food that's placed under a bed is forbidden to consume because it gets a ruach ra, an impure spirit, and is harmful for a person. Some say it means specifically if it's placed on a ground, literally the earth, if it wasn't a floored surface under the bed. However, if the surface was floored, it wouldn't apply. And since it's a matter of discussion, the chatchila, one should never be placing food under a bed, whether they're sleeping, whether they're not sleeping, whether there is flooring on the floor or it's directly the ground. However, b'di'evad, after the fact, if somebody put food under the bed, then there's room to be lenient. If it was a floor, if it was floored, then that's one aspect where someone may be able to be lenient. If there was no one sleeping on the bed during that time when the food was under there's another reason to be lenient and allow the food. However, some say it's still better to wash this food as well, like we mentioned earlier, for when it comes to Nagvasser. And others have different opinions. If there was nobody sleeping on the bed, there'll be more room to be lenient. But if someone was sleeping on the bed, they'll be more strict, even if there is flooring. So due to all these different factors, one should speak to a Rav if that did happen. But one has to realize that even if halachically this food may be permissible, we are told also for this food that this food can cause a person to have some spiritual sensitivity, could harm someone's spiritual sensitivity. Timtum Alev. There's a story of the Tzemach Tzedek once that the Tzemach Tzedek once witnessed his helper going to eat food that was under the bed, and when the helper saw that Tzemach Tzedek was concerned with what he was doing, he told the Tzemach Tzedek, "Don't worry, I don't fear the evil spirit." And the Tzemach Tzedek replied to him, "Fool, do you know what the evil spirit is? It causes you not to want to learn or daven for 3 days." Meaning, it doesn't mean that by eating this, a person is suddenly going to drop dead, but it will harm them, make them more numb spiritually, and that could be detrimental to their spiritual growth. So, because of all that, even if halachically there may be room to be lenient, generally many are more strict when it comes to this, and one should get more guidance from the Rav if it did happen. This applies to both foods and liquids, even if they're covered, even if they're in a sealed, tight metal container, it still applies. And we're careful even in such scenarios. And two more things quickly regarding food that entered a cemetery. There's no issue whatsoever. The food does not get affected by anything, and one does not have to be careful to avoid such food. And regarding food that entered a bathroom, although some are careful to not bring food into a bathroom, halachically, and it's nowhere that brought in any halachic codifiers that there should be any issue with the food. If food was brought into a bathroom, it does not get spiritually contaminated, and there's no issue. One could consume it. Although, if one wants to be a little bit more careful, they should just avoid bringing such food in the bathroom, or should at least make sure it's in a bag. But if it did enter into a bathroom, that would not be a concern. And we'll stop here for today.
Thank you very much. Before we do our conclusion of Tehillim and a Mashiach thought, we want to reach out to our listeners. If you enjoy these weekly classes, please consider partnering with us to strengthen hundreds of women with the knowledge of practical halacha to implement in their homes. Log on to mikveh.org/donate and contribute any amount. You can select Project Chana Power Hour to ensure your donation goes towards our program. Thank you. So let's now put a coin in the pushka. And we're going to say the Rebbe's Kapitel together, as well as Kapitel Chaf for Eretz Yisrael. Shir HaMalais LeDavid. Lolei Adonai shahaya lanu, Yarmar na Yisrael. Lolei Adonai shahaya lanu, Bakum aleinu Adam. Azai chayim bala'onu, Bacharois apam banu. Azai hamayim shetafunu, Nachala avar al nafshenu. Azai avar al nafshenu, Hamayim hazeidoinim. Baruch Adonai, Shalayna sananu teref lishinehem. Nafshenu kitzipanim lata, Mipach yakshim, Hapach nishbar v'anachnu nimlotnu. Ezreinu b'shem Adonai, Oiseh shamayim va'aretz. Let's all have in mind the safety of our hostages and all the Yidden around the world. Lamnatseach mizmar LeDavid. Yancha Adonai b'yom Sara, Yisagev Hashem Elohei Yaakov. Yishlach Ezracha mikaydesh umitzion Yisadeka. Yizkar kol minchaisecha v'ailascha yedashne sela. Yiten lecha chilvavecha v'chol atzascha yemale. Nuranan abishu asecha v'shem Eloheinu nidgal yemale Adonai kol mishalaisecha. Ata yadati ki haishia Adonai Mashiachai Yanehu mishmei kadshai, bigvorais yesha yaminai. Ele v'rechev ve'ele v'asusim, v'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu nazkir. Hema karu v'nafalu, v'anachnu kamnu v'nisaydad, Adonai haishia, hamelach yaneinu b'yom karenu. In Lekutei Sichos, Chelek Chaf Ches, the Rebbe tells us, an individual should feel that his own perfect fulfillment depends on the coming of Mashiach. And as long as Mashiach has not come, he is incomplete. When someone who is awaiting his coming mentions Mashiach, even in passing, this intensifies his anticipation. The absence of Mashiach becomes one of his needs, and everyone is obliged to daven for the fulfillment of his needs, in this case, the coming of Mashiach. Appreciate these weekly classes. Share them with your friends and family. All playbacks are available on mikveh.org/powerhouse and also on all podcast platforms as well as 24/6. Search us up as Project Chana Power Hour. If you have questions on the class or would like to dedicate a week of learning in honor or le'ulei nishma someone, please reach out to us on our email, projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. We look forward to seeing you again next week. May our learning prepare us in our homes and bring every Jew home to Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach now. Thank you for joining.